his story. All right, Patrick, I'll let you take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Yana. So I'm Patrick. I'm an alcoholic. Yana asked me to speak about a month ago, so I've been panicking ever since. And I haven't spoken in about a year, probably longer. So this is a different experience for me, especially since my recovery path has kind of changed a lot since then. So I have an idea of what I want to talk about. How it ends up is a whole other story, but in my experience, when I listen to speakers, the way it typically goes is, a speaker has 15 minutes. They spend about 14 minutes talking about their life story and what drinking has done to them, et cetera, and then say a blanket statement, something like, I did the work and then everything was great, or I gave it up to God and everything was great. And for years, that one phrase has eluded me. What do you mean you did the work? Couldn't we have used part of that 14 minutes to talk about the work and how it affected your life more than this is who I was when I was drinking? It's my own opinion, but I think we all have different versions of the same story, different adjectives and adverbs, but we're all addicts or alcoholics in one way or another. So I wanted to talk today about what is the work of recovery, because I feel like I've had a lot of misgivings or misunderstandings about that. So I'm going to start my story in 2018, October 2018, which is when my husband first found me hiding in the garage, guzzling vodka off of a bottle like I did every night, poured a drink for show and then guzzled booze in the garage. That was where my recovery path started. I said, yep, got a problem and don't throw that away. I'm probably going to need it. And yes, I'll seek some help. And I put myself through an IOP for 3 weeks, and that began my recovery journey. So the twist my story took is that all of the yets, I started checking them off after I got on the recovery path. It wasn't until after October 2018, I divorced my husband. I tried the geographic attempt. I lost my job, relapse, rehab, detox. All of that happened after I admitted there's a problem. And that's very relevant to this conversation, because if, based on my experience, the work of recovery is going to rehab or living in sober living or working with a sponsor or doing steps wholeheartedly, I might add, clearly that didn't work for me, because at every turn I relapsed to varying degrees along the way. And that question of what is the work, obviously those things didn't fit the bill for me, and I don't know what did. What I can tell you is that along the way, I wholeheartedly did my step work. I was as honest as not as I could be. I was as honest as there was to be with my sponsor and meetings, etc. But it seemingly never went far enough, or never sunk in, or never became a different way of being for me. It's something I was always chasing. Like, even I remember when I was managing a sober house, I had come across an article written in 1958 by Bill W. called The Next Frontier, where he addressed emotional sobriety and by his own admission, acknowledged dependence on step work wasn't enough. Dependence on AA meetings and fellowship wasn't enough. There had to be more to the story to feel recovered. And what it was for him was identifying a source of happiness, a source of stability in life. And it's not from other people, it's from self. And I guess that's what I've always been hunting for. Like, even when I was managing a sober house, a 12-step based sober house run by the people who ran the 12-step based recovery center I went to, even in that setting, I was looking for something more. Because the idea of doing steps over and over didn't seem like the solution. It didn't seem like a goal to me. And I started to view others in the house who had to, say the Serenity Prayer 48 times a day and had to talk to their sponsor every time they wanted to date somebody, start a job, leave a job, buy a car, leave a car, move, get an apartment, a housemate, etc. I didn't view that as recovery. I didn't view that as getting back to self. But I didn't know what I was looking for. And there's a couple highlights I want to hit on in this journey to figure out what the work is. And the first is when I left California. I spent 25 years of my life in Northern California, and when I ran, I didn't just go away. I didn't go towards something. It was a classic geographic. I chartered a $16,000 private jet that morning. That afternoon, I was gone. I ran from my husband. I ran from my life. I left a $500,000 house. I just ran. And it took me 2 or 3 years to figure out that was a geographic. And the evidence is pretty clear, because in the 2 or 3 years I was in New Hampshire, my life got worse and worse because I was miserable. I was not making my own decisions. I wasn't making good decisions. I was hiding. I didn't fix anything. I didn't address anything, despite doing step work, despite being in rehab, despite running a sober house. I wasn't making any progress, but I didn't see it. And it wasn't until this morning, oddly enough, it dawned on me, not one person in all these professional environments ever said to me, did you consider that was a geographic attempt at a cure? Nobody ever pointed that out. So the other major event that I like to highlight, and I know I've talked about it more than a little here, was the decision to leave New Hampshire. I had just built a house with my own hands, kind of thing, and it was beautiful. What I made was a really pretty prison, is what it came down to. By then I had lost my license, was stuck in the middle of nowhere, 5 miles from even a postage stamp or a can of soda. I mean, I was out there in the backwoods of New Hampshire, and for this alcoholic, it's not a good place to be. And I remember that I call it the moment of clarity, that moment where I said, the thought, I didn't say it, the thought popped into my head out of the blue, sell the damn house, get out of here. There was so much comfort in that moment, I can't even describe it, because it was the moment where I realized, despite all of my recovery efforts and step work and sponsors and sponsoring and all that, I was making my life more and more unmanageable by the day. And the evidence was clear. And it's funny, in that moment, I realized how much of building that house was my ego. How much of it was me getting the ability to pat myself on the shoulder and say, look what I did. Or giving my dad bragging rights, look what my son did. And I realized none of that mattered, because I was going to be dead by the end of last winter if I stayed on that path, or in bankruptcy, even though I had no mortgage. I mean, the options were not good. But I say all that to drive home the point that even though I was making valiant efforts and doing what I'm supposed to do, nothing was working, nothing was sinking in. And it goes back to that question, what's the work of recovery if I'm doing everything I'm supposed to and I'm not getting a different result? And I'm going to say that 6 months ago, I couldn't have answered this question, but now I feel like I can. And the answer for me is that the work of recovery is application. I mean, it's so simple, it's stupid, right? We've heard that expression before. I can do all the step work in the world. I can be as honest as possible with a sponsor. I can do all of that. But until I put that work into play in my day-to-day life, right, practice these principles in all our affairs, and until I start changing my mindset and using that different mindset in how I go about life, it doesn't matter. None of it mattered. Until I learned to pause and think about what I'm going to say before saying it, what led up to that point didn't matter. I could talk to my sponsor, to therapists, to psychologists all day long about my toxic marriage, but until I started believing it, and until I started recognizing the toxicity of it, it didn't matter, because it was just words. And it turns out I'm really good at saying words. I can say I'm powerless over alcohol till I'm blue in the face, but I'm going to relapse a week later, because I haven't really digested and put into practice what that means for me. So, it's unfortunate that that my path has gone the way it has. Like, all of these realizations, recognizing a geographic for what it is, recognizing that step work isn't the goal, recognizing that meeting makers don't make it. It's sad to me that I had to learn the reality of these things the hard way by relapsing. But the cool thing is I never gave up on myself. I never stopped. I never stopped looking for what that elusive answer was, until I feel like I found it. I don't know what else I want to say. Well, actually, the last iteration of this journey, the current iteration of this journey for me, is departing traditional AA. I have nothing but respect for AA. It helps a shit ton of people. And that was my entry into recovery. I would be dead if it wasn't for AA. I can't argue that. At the same time, I'm going to use the good old definition of insanity. It applies to recovery work also. If I keep relapsing and keep running back to AA and relapse more, guess what? AA is not the answer. So stop trying. I'm not going to get a different result just because I went back for the 14th time. And it was recognition that I had to do something different. And I credit this current path that I'm on to a therapist that I was speaking to in New Hampshire, who introduced me to Jeff Munn's book and made me feel okay about a recovery pathway that didn't involve faith. I don't have to believe a damn thing in order to be well. And even though I knew that to a degree, and the reason why I knew that is, prior to me going into recovery, every single person I knew that was in recovery did not go to AA. Not one of them ran around saying prayers. Not one of them quoted steps all day, every day. They all lived their own happy, content lives in the absence of that type of work. So I knew it worked. I just hadn't figured out how to implement it in my life. But then I finally did. And honestly, it wasn't until just a few weeks ago that for the first time I went into a meeting and said my home group is secular recovery. I never owned it. I kept it a secret to myself out of fear that I would be ostracized for having different beliefs. And to a degree I am. And it's okay, because everybody's got their own path. And what matters to me is that I follow my path, not someone else's. And that one statement alone, I would say, is a hallmark of my recovery path, is recognition that unless I buy into it, it's not going to matter. It's probably going to create resentments, and lead me down a path I don't want to be on. So at 6:20, I'm going to wrap up with just a couple closing words. It was just 3 days ago, I was talking to a therapist, and she put on this screen, the eight keys to successful recovery or something. And most of you know I don't like those kinds of lists, but there it was in front of me. And one of them said, of course, number 8, it was the last one, surprisingly, was a willingness to do anything to stay sober. And for the first time, I said to her, I said, no, I'm not. I am not willing to compromise my beliefs in order to affect recovery. And she tried to twist it so that the answer I gave fitted into some box or some definition she had. And I said, no, I've tried for 4 years to do that. And the result was damaging. I said, I am no longer willing to do anything to achieve recovery. The things I am willing to do, I am willing to have clarity about myself. If I don't have that, I don't know my wants out of my life. I don't know what boundaries I need to have if I don't know myself. So that's first and foremost is knowing me and being true to me. I am willing to stick to my boundaries because I know the damage I can do to myself by drawing the line back in the sand over and over again until there's nothing left of me. I know the importance of that, even when it's uncomfortable. And I know to apply, I'm going to call it step work, but whatever it is you do to get clarity of mind, apply that to my day-to-day living. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's the only way I'm going to maintain this, is if I use whatever tools I have to affect my thinking today and my actions today. That's the only solution I have. And lastly, forgive myself. And that has been the hardest part to do, is forgive myself for staying in a toxic relationship, forgive myself for not seeing the right path for me sooner. The very last thing I'll say is going back to Bill W.'s article from 1958, where he acknowledged there's more to recovery than meetings and step work. I wonder if somebody told him that at the beginning, would it have taken him 25 years to get to that point? Or what path would AA have taken if that revelation was known to Bill sooner? Because I'm glad it's known to me a lot sooner than 25 years into my recovery. That's it for me. Yana, thank you so much for the opportunity. And that's a wrap.